Shalom, this is Chacham Melech Ben Yaakov of Karaite Insights, and I have called today's video New York City, Hell on Earth. And I want to speak a little bit about cities in general, and in particular the city that I happen to be found in at the moment for various reasons, which I'll get into, New York City. So let me go off on New York City a little bit. Anyone who knows me, like the person sitting next to me who doesn't want to go on camera, knows my views about New York City and cities in general, so you may hear a couple of, oh, not this again.
Stay to the right to I-95 South, New York City.
Anyway, hold on, let me get rid of the GPS so it's not bothering us. Oops. But this city is a complete shithole. It is the most disgusting assemblage of human beings ever created by humanity. And by that I don't mean that people aren't nice here. There are very many nice people in New York City, but the attitude, the mentality, the city itself, what it represents is if humanity were to create a place that would be as close to hell as it could create, then the result would be New York City. Now, I rarely watch TV, thank God. I basically never watch TV. I rarely listen to the radio. I would say never listen to the radio also. But a lot of times when I'm listening, on the few occasions that I listen to the radio, I'll hear things like New York City, the greatest city in the world, whatever, broadcasting from New York City, the greatest city in the world. This is not the greatest city in the world. This is a complete shithole. I'm sorry, excuse my French, but it is. This is a complete garbage dump. And it just amazes me that there can be such a dichotomy between the reality of a place and what the people living, or shall I say stuck in the place, think the reality is. So when these people actually say that New York City is the greatest city in the world, they actually believe it. And let's describe the city a little bit, okay? You have millions, 15 million or something like that, or 20 million in the metropolitan area of the city that are just crammed together, okay, on top of each other. Traffic jams. In fact, here, I'm going to switch over. There you go. Traffic jams. I hope you can kind of see that. Traffic jams, road rage, people constantly nervous, people constantly kind of like honking at each other or yelling at each other or cursing at each other, and just working massive amounts of hours, living in small, cramped apartments, or even if they live out in the suburbs, they're living in, a house with a little bit of land. I mean, you have to be a multi-millionaire to really live within the New York City area and be able to afford a lot of land. If you want a lot of land, you have to go far away from the city. If you want a house in the city, which is going to get you like, I don't know, a house with maybe a backyard or something like that, with other houses all over the place, all around you, then you'll have to pay at least $500,000, if not more, maybe $750,000. So the point is not to get into the details of all this. The point is to say that the people who live in this city, and by extension I think many large cities in general, are nuts. They have gone insane. They have somehow been brainwashed into believing that their city, that their situation that they're in is somehow a good or even a great situation, that they would never want to be anywhere else. And the reality is that the place is a horrible place to live. horrible place to raise kids, horrible place to have a family in many, many, many different ways. And again, I'm using New York City as the epitome of what I think is wrong with cities, many cities in general, but New York City really epitomizes what to me is the absolute worst city in the country, and who knows, one of the worst maybe on the planet for various reasons. So how can people be so brainwashed? Well, it's kind of a form of Stockholm syndrome, right? It's kind of a form of denial. It's kind of a form of being in the Matrix, right? The people in the Matrix, if you remember the movie The Matrix, which was really a watershed movie. I saw it. I don't usually watch movies either, in fact, rarely, but I saw the movie The Matrix over 30 times, analyzing every bit of it, and it really, changed my way of thinking, or opened up my eyes. And the people in the Matrix were actually believed they were having a good life. They were very satisfied with the Matrix. They thought they were free. They knew something was wrong, but they thought they were free. They thought they were happy. They thought that this was the epitome of life. There's a lot of different philosophies in the movie. I'm not going to get into the movie, but that is basically one of the ideas, that the people stuck in the Matrix actually believed that they were free, when in fact they were slaves. And it took a very rare person like a Neo character to be able to realize that actually it was hell on earth, and there was something else out there, something else to strive for, some other truth out there. And eventually he was able to break out of the Matrix, mentally and then physically, right? Everything physical always starts with an idea, with a thought, with a concept in one's mind, and then was able to see that the Matrix was not really a good place, but was a trap. It was basically a concentration camp. It was basically a slave camp. Well, it's the same with New York City. I actually consider New York City not to be quote unquote the greatest city in the world, but I consider it to be literally a concentration camp. I don't mean it's a death camp, because people are not exterminated, although in a certain way they kind of are. They're worked to death, and they're given very little in return, no vacation or very little vacation. They're not even given a house. They're given a little cubicle to live in, a little rat-infested cubicle, along with all the other millions and millions of other slaves in their rat-infested cubicles. And somehow or another, these nutcases, these brainwashed human beings, believe that they're in some kind of paradise. So that's the question: is how can people be so far off in their perception of what reality is from what reality really is? And I want to go further along these lines and say that if you look at the past election, this most recent election of Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, I almost don't like saying that name, and just shudder to even have those words come out of my mouth, but I'll let them come out of my mouth. If you look at the most recent election, you see that at the end of the day, the election was all about an urban mentality versus a non-urban, versus a rural mentality. One could say, the large coastal cities and their mentality, so-called quote-unquote liberalism, multiculturalism, quote-unquote progressiveness, that whole suite of thoughts or thought processes or ways of seeing the world that are common to the large cities in New York, in the United States, such as New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, etc., versus the rest of the country, the heartland of the country, where you have people who, for the most part, are not crowded into large cities. Maybe they're still living on farms. Maybe they're living in small towns or out on the outskirts of small towns where they have big patches of land, where they're still connected to nature, rather than have their lives completely devoid and stripped of all nature, as it is when you live in the large cities, such as New York City. And it was pointed out by many commentators that it almost seemed that there were two Americas. there was the America of the coasts, of the coastal cities, and then there was the America of everybody else. Okay, and this time the America of everybody else was able to win the election, was able to come to their senses and somehow elect someone that at least in theory they thought and believe will somehow represent their values, and they were able to defeat the mentality, this other America of the large cities. It was only because of the system of the Electoral College that this was possible, and that's exactly, as people pointed out, why the Electoral College was set up, so that where areas that have large concentrations of population do not have an inordinate say in the government, or in the process of government of the United States. The same reason that the Senate was set up, right? Each state has 2 senators. It doesn't matter if the state has millions of people in it or 500,000 people in it, right? The largest states and the smallest states each have 2 senators. The Senate is considered the higher house, just as based on the House of Lords in the English Parliament, the House of Lords was considered the highest house, and that was an expression of the fact that states were not just conglomerations of random people, but they were entities. They themselves were kind of like mini countries before they joined together to form the United States. At any rate, the purpose of this is not to give a civics lesson about the United States. I don't even really consider myself an American. I just happen to be here in this country for various reasons. At the end of the day, I don't give a shit about this country. I hope that it succeeds, and I hope that it repents, because I hope that any country repents. I would have hoped that ancient Rome or ancient Greece repented as well, but I don't have any particular loyalty to this country any more than any other country. I hope Albania repents. I hope the Republic of the Congo repents. I hope everybody repents before Yehovah brings punishment on those societies. However, I'm using all this as an example to say that there are 2 different sets of mentalities: the urban mentality and the rural mentality. Let's take a look at the differences between these mentalities. Okay, if you look at the typical urbanite, let's start with the typical person living in small towns, rural areas. Such a person is generally much more connected with the land, is much more connected with nature. The interactions between people in these rural areas tend to be more traditional. It tends to be more trust between people, because people tend to know each other a bit more, and there tends to be more traditional outlook on life. People tend to get married earlier. They tend to have slightly, although the urban blight has infected all of the country and much of the world. They tend to have longer lasting marriages, less divorce, kids, house. There tends to be more traditional view of the man as the head of the household, rather than the kind of feminazi view that you'll find in the large coastal cities. In other words, you have people who are much more connected. I won't say they're completely connected, but much more in general connected with the land, with nature, with the ways of Yehovah, with the natural order of the world, the natural order of traditional societies that have been in this world for thousands upon thousands of years. Okay, contrast that with the urbanites, and they are now disconnected from the land. They're disconnected from nature. They are basically dependent on an industrial supply system to supply them with their water, to supply them with their food, to supply them with their transportation, to supply them with their medicine, and so they are disconnected. They are in the matrix. They're disconnected from that which makes man connected to God through the land, through nature, right? We know that Adam was named Adam because he was taken from the Adamah, right? He was taken from the land. Adamah means land. So when a man becomes disconnected from the land, then he becomes disconnected from himself, and he becomes disconnected from Yehovah. And that is what we see in the cities. Basically, we see what I would call like basically a mass psychosis or mass mental illness, an entire population of millions upon millions upon millions of people who have been taken away from the natural way of living, from the natural way of life, connection to the land, growing their own foods, being able to find their own water, even hunting if that's what they're into. I happen to be a vegetarian, so I'm not into that. But taken away from all of this, taken away from having large open stretches of land, from being able to acquire their needs rather inexpensively, rather than paying $300 for a fancy meal, or or 5 times the price for groceries that you may find in a large city as opposed to a small town. So so these people suffer from mass mental illness. Okay, they tend to have a lot of depression. They tend to be alone a lot of the times, even though they're surrounded by millions and millions of people, because they have abandoned traditional lifestyle, because they've abandoned the traditional family structure, the connection to God, the connection to the land. So there's a lot of bachelors and bachelorettes. There's a lot of divorce. There is a lot of destruction of the extended and the nuclear family. And as one of my heroes, Alex Jones, always likes to point out, what you do have is the atomization or the individualization. Individualization is a positive way of saying the atomization of people, whereby everyone becomes a single unit, disconnected from husband, disconnected from wife, disconnected from children, disconnected from parents, cousins, extended family, aunts, uncles, and on and on and on. So that is the Blythe of the city. And this city, Blythe, this mentality now wants to, as we saw in the movie The Matrix, the people who were stuck in the Matrix, they wanted to defend their existence in the Matrix, right? So it was pointed out, one scene in the Matrix was pointed out that anybody who's not freed mentally from the Matrix is like an agent. In other words, is like one of the evil enforcers of the Matrix, because they are not, their mind is not ready to be freed, so they will react violently when anyone tries to free them mentally or physically from their entrapped circumstances. So it's the same in the city. It almost seems like the cities, like New York City, the cities are black holes that want to suck more people in. They want to suck more people in to their sick, deranged mentality, their mentality of disconnection from the land, their mentality of disconnection from the Torah, their mentality of disconnection from Yehovah. It's almost like they want to take over, like a plague, or like a virus, or like a zombie infestation that now wants to turn other people into zombies. And in this particular election in the United States, the more traditional, the more sensible rural areas were able to hold back this wave. We're able to strike back a little bit, and we're able to elect someone that represents, at least, the irony is from New York City, but we won't even go into that irony. They were able to elect somebody who they felt would represent represents their values, and not the values of the large, distorted, quote-unquote, liberal urban centers. So whether they'll be able to hold off in future elections, we shall see, because of course the urban centers will try to change the demographics. Well, that will be the game they play, just as Obama tried to change the demographics to make it impossible for middle America to elect those that identify with its values. So we'll see. The point I wanted to make is that one other thing regarding the election is that's why we see the liberal, quote-unquote, elitist, there we go, there's police making some more money off a poor unfortunate soul just trying to get home from work. At any rate, the urban centers, that's why they were so freaked out, because they were stopped short of their goal of electing this witch, this creature, this Hillary Clinton, who would push forth, who would have basically sealed the fate of America by exporting all of these distorted, deranged, disconnected, sick values of the urban centers, the values of the matrix to all of America, thereby basically putting, I think, the final nail in the coffin for the United States, as Donald Trump pointed out. He said, if you don't elect me, then that's it, folks. There probably will not be an America for me to elect me again in another 4 years. And I think there was a lot of truth to that. I really think that that for some reason, Yehovah must want to give America one more chance to correct its evils and to correct its ills, and that's somehow why he took Donald Trump and led him by the hand through all of the, enemies all around him straight to the presidency. It's almost like this is the last chance. If this doesn't work, then America is finally finished. If Hillary had gotten in, I truly believe that would have been the end of America. Truly, I mean, literally, that would have been the end of America. It may have not played itself out for 5 or 10 or 15 years, but that would have been the end of America. At any rate, so let me sum up by just recapping some of the ideas. The difference between the urban mentality, which is a sick, disconnected mentality, a mentality of materialism, a mentality of disconnection from nature and land and from Yehovah, a mentality of working long hours for money. Everything's money. Everything is profits. Everything is me, right? And then all of these millions of people living on top of each other like rats, in these small houses or these small apartments. It's enough to drive anybody crazy, and it has. And then this black hole of this, this shithole known as New York City that tries to suck more and more people in, so more and more people can be enslaved, working 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week, for salaries that they then can feel rich. But how can they feel rich? Because they live in these tiny little apartments. And any rate, you get the idea. So that's kind of the point I want to make, that we have a war going on in this world between disconnection from the structure, from the way of Yehovah, as typified in the large cities such as New York, being the epitome of the large cities, and those who are desperately still trying to hold on to some kind of traditional values. Well, what's going to happen in the end if, nothing can stay away from the center, nothing can stay away from the way it's supposed to be for too long. Eventually there's a backlash. Eventually everything snaps back into its place. So if these urban centers don't change their ways, they will be destroyed. They'll be destroyed by the hand of Yehovah, using the enemies of those particular countries, using the enemies of America, whether it's going to be ISIS or Al Qaeda or China or North Korea or Russia or God knows what. These urban centers will be destroyed, and they will be razed to the ground. This is the history of any culture that abandons the ways of Yehovah. And the rural centers that are more traditional, I don't know what will happen to them. Maybe the whole country will go under. Maybe that will separate into a separate country. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But that's kind of the main point I want to make. Stay connected to Yehovah. Stay connected to the land. Stay connected to nature. Stay connected to the simple things. Eat good, wholesome foods. Good, fresh vegetables off the land. Organic if you can. Local if you can. Grow it yourself if you can. And don't be someone who is rich by having a large number in a bank account, but nonetheless has a very low quality of life, because he lives in a city with millions of other nervous, mentally ill people crowded like rats on top of each other. Be someone who lives out on the land, who has extensive land to run around, who sees the sun and the moon and the wide open skies and the mountains and the streams and the trees. That is the way man was meant to live. And the scourge of the city has taken man away from his natural way of being and made him a bit a bit crazy. So let me turn it back. With that being said, I will continue this topic many times, I'm sure, because this is something that's constantly on my mind. This is something that's burning in my mind at all times. And so this will be touched upon in many other videos. But let me end it here by saying thank you for watching. This has been Chacham Melech Ben Yaakov of Karaite Insights. Please visit us at www.karaiteinsights.com, on YouTube, on our YouTube channel called Karaite Insights, on Twitter at Karaite Insights, and on our Facebook group, the World Alliance of Karaim. Thank you, and may Yehovah be with you.